Welcome to tonight's journey, a journey that will carry us across the mist-veiled fields of Ireland, through the wind-lashed pine forests of Scotland, and deep into the pages of legends that have lived for more than 3,000 years in Celtic memory. If you are sitting in a quiet room, or have already lain down and let your eyes begin to rest, let your breathing slow just a little, because from this moment on, the door between the modern world and the ancient one will gradually begin to open. We will begin with the Tuatha De Danann, the legendary fairy folk who emerged from the northern mists. We will meet Morrígan, the goddess of battle and fate, who could grant victory or foretell death. We will walk beside heroes like Cuchulainn and Fionn McCumhail, touching the light of the legends that nourished an entire culture. We will gaze down into Annwn, the other world as soft and dreamlike as the soul of Wales. And in the end, we will listen for the cry of the Banshee, then follow the current of history to see how Samhain became Halloween. If you are ready, close your eyes gently. Let us begin. You are standing on a wild shore of Ireland, where the waves strike the rocks like the heartbeat of the earth. Wind from the Atlantic moves through the low grasses, carrying with it the scent of sea salt and the smell of ancient moss clinging beneath the feet of black cliffs. The sky is ash gray, soft as the woven wool the Celts once wrapped around themselves on the coldest days. Far away, you hear a deep and steady sound, like the beat of a drum rising from beneath the ground. Not the drum of battle, nor the sound of footsteps, but the sound of memory, the memory of a people who once spread across nearly half of Europe, and who now remain only as echoes in songs, in legends, and in the green burial mounds scattered like musical notes across the land. You walk down an earthen path that leads to a hill covered in grass wet with dew. The wind still blows, but now it carries voices, very faintly, like whispers behind a thin wall. Someone or something is calling you. The door we are about to step through is not the door of time, but the door of memory. Because Celtic mythology does not rest on a fixed timeline like that of Greece or Egypt, but in a spiral where story, human beings, and gods are woven together like threads in an ancient tapestry. When you place your hand upon the damp grass, the ground beneath your feet gives a slight tremor. A cold wind slips across your neck, and then space opens, not by light and not by darkness, but by mist. White coils of mist, fine as silk, wrap themselves around your eyes, as though the hand of a god were gently covering your sight, then drawing you into another world where everything began. As the mist slowly clears, you find yourself standing in a meadow that stretches all the way to the horizon, thick shrubs, boulders covered in moss, and winding dirt paths leading toward ancient burial mounds. Sida, this is the place where Irish mythology says the gods, the ancestors, and even the beings of the fairy world once lived. But before they became legend, who were they? To answer that question, we must step out of the poetry of this beginning and enter history. From the 1st century BCE, Greek and Roman historians referred to a people they called the Keltoi, or Keltai. tribes who spoke Celtic languages and spread from Central Europe to Western Europe. The Romans regarded them partly with respect, partly with fear. They described the Celts as tall warriors, fair-haired, fond of gold ornaments, living in tribes and revering gods in the forests, rivers, and hills. But when we speak of Celtic mythology, we are not speaking of all Europe. We are speaking of the lands that preserved the full soul of that ancient tradition: Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. For only in those westernmost lands, beyond the reach of the Roman Empire, did the oldest Celtic stories survive across thousands of years. Celtic mythology was not written down at the time of its birth. It lived through the spoken word, through bards, poets, and chieftains. Only in the Middle Ages, when Irish monks began recording texts, did those stories become writing? There are three main groups of sources. Lebor Gabala Erin, the Book of the Taking of Ireland. This is a semi-mythological compilation about the peoples who came to Ireland, from Partholón, Nemed, and the Fir Bolg, to the Tuatha De Danann and the Milesians. This text is a mixture of mythology, historical reshaping, and in part the influence of the Bible. It is not entirely accurate in the strict historical sense, but it is the most important mental map for understanding how the Irish saw themselves. The mythological cycles. Irish mythology is not one single unified mythology, but is divided into 4 cycles. The mythological cycle, the stories of the gods, such as the Tuatha De Danann. The Ulster cycle, telling of Cu Chulainn and the kingdoms of the north. The Fenian cycle, telling of Fionn mac Cumhaill and the Fianna. The King's cycle, legends that blend history with the tales of ancient kings. The Mabinogion of Wales, a collection of Welsh tales, including branches such as Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, and the adventures connected to Annwn, the Welsh Otherworld. These texts are the foundation through which we understand Celtic mythology today. But the strange thing is this: they were written by Christian monks, and yet those monks recorded pagan stories in astonishing detail, perhaps because to them, each Celtic myth was not merely a story, but a portrait of the soul of an entire people. Now, let us return to the meadow where we are standing. Look toward the western horizon, where the sun is slipping down into the sea. If you sit very still and listen to the breathing of the earth and the dim pulse of the ocean, you will realize that in Celtic mythology, the Otherworld is not a fixed place. It does not lie high above like Olympus, nor is it locked beneath the ground like Hades. The Otherworld is more like a thin layer of light drifting just above the surface of this world. A plane of reality laid over our own, existing right beside us, yet revealing itself only in the most extraordinary moments. The Celts described that place by many names: Tir na Nog, the land of youth, Mag Mell, the pleasant plain, or Emain Ablach, the apple island of immortality. Though the names differ, they all share one thing: that realm is an ideal land, where all pain is erased as mist vanishes in sunlight. There is no decay there, no loss. The living who enter it keep their form unchanged. The dead return like moonlight upon water, gentle and without sorrow. The gods dwell there, yet it is also the place where good souls may go when earthly life has come to an end. But the other world does not open easily. It is not for those who seek power, nor for those who wander out of curiosity. The other world reveals itself only to those heroes brave enough to pass beyond fear, poets with pure hearts, those who are near death. When the boundary between life and death has grown so thin that a single breath may carry them elsewhere, and sometimes to those who are called away by the music of a harp, a voice, or the pipe song of mysterious beings. The doorway to the other world is always disguised. In Ireland, it may be a cedar mound, a rounded grassy rise that outwardly looks like nothing more than part of a hill. But on the night of Samhain, or during sacred hours, that door may open like a blue radiance beneath the grass. In Scotland, the other world often hides in water, a still loch smooth as glass, or an ancient well with water black as ink. The Celts believed that water remembers every story, and that sometimes it reflects not the sky, but another world gazing back at you. In Wales, the doorway opens through forests that change their direction. You walk along a familiar path, and suddenly it turns toward a way that did not exist yesterday. And if you keep walking, you may enter Annwn without ever knowing it. And in the coastal regions, the other world comes from the west, where the sun sinks into the sea, leaving behind a veil of mist brushing the water's surface. The ancients believed that if one kept going, farther and farther into that mist, one would eventually arrive in Tir na Nog. Time in the other world is a mystery. An hour may be a day may be a century. A mortal may wander there and taste boundless joy. But when he returns to the earthly world, he may find himself no more than dust in a land he no longer recognizes. And yet, however mysterious, however strange, however full of its own laws, the other world in Celtic mythology is never absolutely threatening. It is not a trial. It is not a punishment. It is simply another part of the universe, deeper, subtler, and open only to those who know how to listen to the faint calling of earth, wind, and mist. A world always beside our own, only one breath away. And most of all, on certain nights of the year, the boundary between the two worlds grows thin. One of those nights is Samhain. Amid the stories of the Celts, a strange image appears again and again, the woman who holds power. Unlike in other mythologies, where kings or male gods stand as the emblem of authority, in Ireland, the woman is often the embodiment of the land, of sovereignty, of the union between human beings and nature. They are not merely goddesses of love or war. They are the land itself. A man who wishes to become king must marry the sovereignty goddess in a ritual, symbolic sense. If he is worthy, the land will bless him. If not, the land will punish him. This image appears not only in Morrígan, but is scattered throughout countless folk tales. It shapes the uniquely Celtic vision of the relationship between human beings and the land they inhabit. The Celts did not build vast temples like the Greeks, nor pyramids like the Egyptians, nor leave behind stone law codes like Babylon. What they left behind were poems, myths, rituals, songs, and the memory of ancient burial mounds. To them, the world was not divided into the sacred and the ordinary. The gods lived in the forest, in the river, in the stone, in the wind. Human beings were not far from the divine, but moved within the same current. Perhaps that is why Celtic mythology feels so different, intimate, near, half hidden, as though the gods were standing just behind you, only a thin layer of mist away. When you look again at the meadow before you, you will realize the Celts did not leave behind a single united empire. There was no single king. There was no single capital. But they left behind something more important, a soul. That soul appears in the stories of those who were warriors bearing bronze weapons, yet with hearts as tender as poetry, poets who could stop the rain with song, druids who could read the thoughts of trees, goddesses crossing onto the battlefield in the form of ravens, heroes who fought until their final breath to protect the province of Ulster, or families who believed that each soul departing from this world would be announced by the cry of a fairy woman. Whether or not you believe those stories, they still endure, alive in the cultures of Ireland, Scotland, and Wales across many centuries, through invasions, wars, and the modern age. Now the mist before you moves once more. It spins in the shape of a circle, then narrows into a silver gate. You hear a sound like the touch of a harp upon the air. A voice, clear yet distant, whispers, "Step inside. This is the place where the Celts believed all magic begins. This is the place where even air and light know how to sing. This is our realm." A warm wind brushes softly across your face. The gate opens wider. You step through, and the world ahead blazes into life with the shimmering green of mist, the far-off beat of war drums, the scent of freshly cut grass, and the resonance of gods who never grow old. This is the age of the greatest beings Ireland ever told of. This is the moment when legend truly begins. And in the next chapter, we will meet them. The Tuatha De Danann, the fairy folk who emerged from the mist, bearing 4 treasures: power, beauty, wrath, and a mark that would never fade from the history of Celtic mythology. Imagine this. You are standing on a desolate highland, where the wind moves through the blades of grass like the whisper of time. The sky stretches wide above, pale and white like a linen cloth hung beneath a weak sun. There's no sound except the heartbeat of the earth, a deep, steady rhythm, older than any story humanity has ever told. Suddenly, the mist thickens. Not ordinary mist, but a silver-laden veil, as though it were glowing from within. The wind changes direction. The scent of distant snow mingles with the fragrance of unfamiliar herbs. And then, from within that mist, the shapes of the first people appear. Not gods, and not entirely mortals. They are beings of wisdom, magic, and light, carrying with them the traces of a civilization no longer remembered in human history. They are the Tuatha De Danann, the children, the people of the goddess Danu. In that moment, you understand that you are witnessing the instant when the world changes hands. Ireland, a land still wild and not yet named upon the map of humankind, is about to enter the age of beings from another millennium. According to Lebor Gabala Eren, the Tuatha De Danann came from 4 mysterious cities lying in the far north, where knowledge, magic, and art were preserved within enchanted schools. Falhas Gorias Finias Murias. No one knows exactly where those cities were. There is no map. There are no archaeological traces. There are only stories passed from one generation to the next, saying that each city had a great master of magic, one who taught the Tuatha De Danann secrets known to no one else, how to speak with the earth, how to command light, how to keep the harvest alive through even the bleakest years. From those 4 cities, 4 treasures were brought to Ireland, each treasure like a fragment of this people's soul. The spear of Lu never missing its mark, the Clayom Soleil of Nuada, a light that cleaves darkness in 2, the cauldron of the Dagda, from which no one ever rises, still hungry, the stone of destiny, Lia Fail, which will cry aloud when the true king sets foot upon it. When their ships drew near the shores of Ireland, it is said that they burned every one of their vessels, not out of despair, but because they wished to prove that they would never return to where they had come from. Ireland would be home, and they had come to stay. When the Tuatha De Danann set foot upon the land, they covered the sun for 3 days and 3 nights. Many believe this is an image of their magical power, even light and weather bent to their will. Imagine that scene. The sky suddenly darkens, though it is still midday. The wind turns, carrying warmth from the new land. Clouds in spiraling forms, as if painted by hand, gather above the shore. Within a darkness green as jade, the first footsteps touch the soil of Ireland. Each drop of dew upon the grass flashes beneath a light that is not the sun. That was the moment marking the beginning of a new age, an age in which humankind, nature, and the gods would live side by side. Among the leaders of the Tuatha De Danann, the most prominent was Nuada Ergetlam, Nuada of the Silver Hand. Legend says that in their first battle in Ireland, Nuada lost one of his arms, and in ancient belief, a king had to be physically whole. As a symbol of the wholeness of the land, he ruled. To lose one arm meant to lose the right to kingship. But the Tuatha De Danann did not abandon him. The healer Dian Cecht fashioned for Nuada a hand of silver. It was not merely a replacement. It could move, fight, and support him like a living human hand. The image of Nuada Ergetlam became a symbol of the Celtic spirit, a people who valued wisdom and creation more than brute strength. Even so, that silver hand, beautiful, pure, and gleaming, also reminds us that all power carries the price of sacrifice. The Dagda was often called by another name among the Celts, Eochaid Olathair, the great father of all. But his greatness was not the kind that made people bow in fear. It was the greatness of warmth, like a hearth fire in the long nights of winter, like a deep and resonant voice that could make an entire small house fall silent and listen. In the ancient texts, the Dagda is described as a large-bodied man, with tangled hair, a rough cloak, and shoes so large they drag upon the earth. He did not bear the distant beauty of an untouchable god. He bore the everyday beauty of one always ready to share a meal and a story. His cauldron, choir and sick, is the symbol of boundless generosity. Whoever sat at his table would never go hungry, and even the poorest would be treated like an honored guest. His harp, Waithne, was not merely an instrument, it was the breath of the whole world. When the Dagda plucked its strings, the sea grew calm, the wind changed direction, and the seasons shifted according to its tones. A single short melody could bring laughter, sorrow, or sleep to an entire army. And his great two-ended club, Lorg Mor, was the union of life and death. One end could strike down 100 men with a single touch. The other could awaken souls that had already left the body, in the Dagda. Life and death were not opposites, but only two beats within the same cosmic song. People loved him because he never kept his distance. He ate with them, worked with them, sang with them, and listened to them. And in the Celtic imagination, no god stood closer to the human heart than the Dagda, a god who could laugh as loudly as thunder, yet remain as gentle as earth, as strong as the root of a tree, and as warm as flame. If the Dagda was the beating heart of the Tuatha De Danann, then Brigid was the gentle breath that kept the whole world in motion. She did not come with thunder or lightning, but with the first light of every dawn, a light thin as silk, yet enough to push back even the longest night. The Celts said that Brigid did not walk as other gods did. She spread like fire catching dry straw, like wind passing through a field, like a song suddenly rising in a dark house. Brigid is the goddess of beginnings, of all that starts, of the first green shoot pushing out of the earth. She is present in the first line of poetry a poet manages to find, the small flame that helps human beings endure the cold, the pure drop of water falling upon a wound and making it heal. The first lullaby a mother sings to a child not yet able to speak its own name. The hand of the blacksmith heating iron to red before it becomes a tool. The rhythmic sound of the loom weaving the first cloth of the new season. Ancient texts say that when Brigid raised her voice in song, winter would hold its breath and spring would draw nearer. When she stepped across the meadow, wherever her feet touched, flowers and grasses seemed to grow faster, simply because they longed to brush against the hem of her robe. Unlike Morrígan, with her cold raven eyes, or Lugh, blazing like the sun, Brigid possessed the beauty of gentleness, hair long as soft fire, eyes clear as water in an ancient well, and a voice so light that people sometimes mistook it for the wind. Brigid and the undying flame. At Kildare, legend says that a fire was always kept burning for her. It was not a fire of destruction, but a fire that preserved life. The nuns who came later, when Christianity spread across the land, continued to tend that flame as though they were tending the soul of Ireland itself. This made Brigid one of the rarest cases of all. Her image was not erased, but transformed into Saint Brigid, the most beloved saint in Ireland. She is a bridge between the divine world and the human one, between paganism and Christianity, between winter and spring. Brigid is the gentlest of bridges. She does not come to fight. She does not come to judge. She comes to keep the light alive, even when the darkness is at its thickest. In the heart of the Celtic people, Brigid is the first warmth of every year, and also the last warmth remaining in memory when winter settles over the earth and sky. If the other world has a gate, then the keeper of its key is Annwn MacLear, god of the sea, god of mist, and ruler of the western lands. He does not live upon a high mountain peak, but upon the waves, within the thin mist covering the sea at dawn. The stories told of him carry a strange breath about them. He rides a chariot over the waves as though riding over solid ground. The sea itself opens a path when he passes. His cloak can make mortals invisible. He can carry the souls of the dead across the ocean into the other world. If the Dagda is earth and Brigid is fire, then Annwn is water, impossible to hold in one's hand, yet always embracing all things. But the Tuatha De Danann did not arrive to step into an empty paradise. Ireland already had rulers then, the Fomorians, primal beings bound to the sea, to darkness, to natural disaster, and to chaos. These two races entered into the great conflict known as Mag Tuired. This was not merely a clash of weapons, but a collision between order and chaos, abundance and ruin, light and darkness. Lugh with the spear of victory, the Dagda with the harp that ruled the seasons, Morrígan with prophecy, all united to defeat the forces of the Fomorians and reshape Ireland. The result: the Tuatha De Danann became the ruling race of Ireland, and Ireland entered an age of knowledge, magic, and art. But every glory comes to an end, after generations of rule. The Tuatha De Danann had to face those who came after them, the Milesians, the ancestors of the Gaels. This confrontation was not a struggle of good against evil. It was a transfer of ages, the age of the gods yielding to the age of humankind. The Tuatha De Danann, rather than vanishing, withdrew beneath the earth, into the hills, the burial mounds, the Side, and became the Ausi, the folk of the mound, the ancestors of all fairy stories in Irish culture. No longer kings upon the surface of the world, they became forms thin as mist, still watching, still intervening when needed, but rarely stepping out into the light. There they wait, not to return, but to keep the other world alive within the memory of humankind. On the day the Tuatha De Danann withdrew beneath the burial mounds, the earth did not fall silent. On the contrary, another rhythm began to sound, the rhythm of heroes, of human beings carrying divine blood, yet born from this land. Because, as every great mythology knows, when the gods step back, the heroes rise. A new generation begins to take shape, warriors with the speed of thunder and lightning. Those who carry a power that cannot be fully spoken in words, those whose hearts are bound at once to the mortal world and to the other world. Night descends over Ireland so slowly that it is almost impossible to tell when the final trace of evening has truly gone out. Across the wide and barren highland, the wind slips through the low grass, making the whole earth ripple in dark. Soft waves like animal fur against the violet-black sky, where the edge of the clouds still holds a faint dying streak, like the ash of a fire long gone cold. A black speck circles above. It sweeps in one wide arc, then another, before settling upon a moss-covered stone, as quietly as though it had been sitting there for thousands of years. That is no ordinary raven, beneath moonlight sliding through the gaps in the clouds. Its eyes flash with a deep and chilling light, like the kind of light that lies still at the bottom of ancient wells, where the water is so dark it no longer reflects a human face. You hear no cry from it. It does not move, and yet its mere presence is enough to change the air around you. The ground beneath your feet seems heavier. The wind seems to slow, and in that stillness, you feel a gaze passing straight through you, not touching flesh, but reaching somewhere deeper, where human beings keep their oldest and most primal fear of fate. Then the wind changes. A cold breath glides across the meadow, carrying a scent that is hard to name. It is the smell of metal left behind in the night mist, the smell of iron, the smell of spears after battle, the smell of blood long dried upon stone and earth. It comes only faintly, just enough to make you wonder whether you truly smelled it at all. And then, woven into the wind, comes a sound so small it is almost not a sound, as though someone were leaning close to your ear to whisper from a distance that does not belong to this world. Morrígan, the Phantom Queen, Nu Huang Bong Ma, the woman of war, of fate, of that fragile moment between a breath that still remains and a soul that has already begun to depart. If Bridget is the first light of morning, if Dagda is the warmth of a hearth in a small house in winter, then Morrígan is what appears when every fire has burned low, when human voices have retreated, and only earth, wind, black ravens, and the truths no one can escape remain. She does not come to comfort, nor does she come to punish. She comes to remind us that every victory has its price, that every glory walks beside darkness, and that every life must pass through the door no hero can evade forever. In the ancient texts of Ireland, Morrígan is never an easy figure to hold in place. Even her name trembles with layers of meaning. At times she is Morrígan, the great queen. At times she is Morrígan, the Phantom Queen, a name carrying with it the feeling of night mist, of black ravens, of a power that has no need to step into the light in order to be seen. The old storytellers never truly agreed on whether she was a goddess, a being of the fairy world, or something older still than the Tuatha De Danann themselves. Perhaps that is because Morrígan does not belong to a single form. She is that which is always changing before human eyes, like water that may be still, may rise in waves, or may dissolve into white mist beneath a cold sky. At times she appears as a woman so beautiful that one might think one is looking at dawn upon a river. At times she is the black raven perched upon a post after battle, head slightly tilted, eyes unblinking. At times she is only a solitary figure by the water's edge, washing a white garment that is slowly turning red. While the river lies so still, it is as though all of nature dares not speak. She is not death. Death comes after. Morrígan is the whisper that foretells it. She is not war. She is the soul of war. She is not victory or defeat. She is the fate standing behind them both. In many stories, Morrigan does not walk alone. She appears as a triple goddess, a being with three faces turned toward three directions of the same mystery. Badby is the mad cry in the sky, the chaos of battle when the ranks break and fear begins to move faster than feet. Macha is bound to sovereignty, to the power of the land, to speed and to pain, like the woman driven to run until death reveals the cruelty of humankind before the spirit of the country. And Morrigan is the dark heart of this entire image, the one who knows in advance who will win, who will return, and whose name will be called in the final night. 3 names, 3 forms, yet many scholars believe they are only 3 shades of a single presence. Just as darkness may take the shape of night, of storm cloud, or of deep water, and still remain darkness. Imagine a Celtic battlefield in the mist of early morning. The grass has been trampled flat into mud. The air is thick with the smell of wet earth, sweat, heated iron, and blood. Shields crash together with a sharp and bitter sound. Voices cry out for comrades, only to vanish into the low mist. Feet strike the waterlogged ground. Horses breathe in harsh bursts. And somewhere amid all that confusion, in a space no one dares approach too closely, there may stand a woman in stillness. Her hair is black as a raven's wing in rain. Her cloak is a deep crimson, like the last streak of the sun just before it sinks into the sea. She lifts no spear. She raises no shield. She shouts no cry. She merely stands there, motionless, watching, as though the whole storm of iron and blood were only a ritual she has seen repeated countless times before. The warriors who see her understand without anyone needing to explain. It is the moment when all prayers become small. Either they will return when dawn rises, or their souls will cross to another shore before the first light touches the grass. In that moment, when life and death are separated by only the thinnest breath. Morrigan does not strike. She does not push fate. She records it. A raven flying above a warrior's head may be the sign that he will live. A red-stained garment being washed beneath the river may be the sign that someone will fall before the night is over. A shrill cry splitting the sky, thin and sharp as a blade, may be Badb foretelling that an entire army is about to break. To the Celtic people, victory does not come from the strength of the arm alone. It comes from whether fate inclines toward you. And fate, very often, wears the face of Morrigan. No story carves this truth more deeply than her confrontation with Cuchulainn, the young flame of Ireland. He is the kind of hero every saga loves, strong, young, radiant, and burning with the fierce belief that his body can withstand all things. Morrigan, by contrast, is the quiet darkness beside him, the eyes that never leave him, even when he does not know she is there. On one side, life erupting like fire. On the other, fate waiting with patience. The first time she comes to him, it is not in the shape of a black raven or a phantom of the battlefield, but in the form of a beautiful young woman. Perhaps the wind had quieted that afternoon. Perhaps the light over the meadow was still soft and gold. She appeared with a beauty that might cause any man to slow his steps, and she offered him help in the battle to come, while also revealing a feeling too subtle for anyone but the very young to dismiss lightly. But Cu Chulainn, proud and hot as newly forged steel, refused her. He had no time for such things. He still had battle ahead, still had glory, still had his own path. Morrigan did not grow angry in the way human beings do. She simply withdrew in silence. Like a dark cloud closing beyond the edge of a hill, then battle came, and she returned. This time not as a beauty one might touch, but as ordeal. She became a heifer to block his way, a wolf to drive the cattle into chaos, and then an eel coiling around his leg while life and death rushed beside each other like two violent currents. Cu Chulainn overcame each of those forms because he was still himself, swift, fierce, unwilling to yield. But he was wounded, and the price of standing against fate never disappears simply because one wins for a moment. Later, when Morrigan appeared before him as an old woman, he did not recognize her. He blessed her for a small act of kindness in that brief moment, never knowing that he had just brushed against the greatest mystery of fate, the one that had been following him long before he ever heard her name. The last time Morrigan stood beside Cu Chulainn, there was nothing left for them to struggle over. No vengeance, no anger, no trial, only the presence of a witness. When the hero bound himself to a stone so that he might die standing, so that he would not fall like a felled tree. When more blood had already left his body than life remained within it, it was Morrigan's raven that settled upon his shoulder. That was the sign that told all Ireland the flame had gone out. Morrigan did not kill Cu Chulainn. She only did what she has always done: stand there when fate closes one of its circles. To the ancient Irish, land was never merely land. Every hill, every river, every meadow possessed its own soul, and that soul often wore the face of a woman in that folk memory. Morrigan is not only a goddess of war, she is also the spirit of Ireland itself, wild, dangerous, sacred, beautiful in a way that draws one in, even as it makes one wish to step back. Perhaps that is why, in many ancient texts, she appears on the night of Samhain, when the boundary between worlds grows thin as mist upon the grass at dawn. It is on such a night, beside the river Unshin, that she meets Dagda. Do not imagine it as a scene of blazing passion in the manner of Mediterranean mythology. This meeting is quieter, deeper. The sky is dark purple. The river is flat as polished stone. The air is so cold and clear that one can hear the grass shifting in the wind. Dagda comes from the south, carrying with him the warmth of earth, of harvest, of healthy cattle, and of houses where fires still burn. Morrigan comes from the north, fingers touching the surface of the water, bringing with her the silence of prophecy, of battles not yet begun, of fate not yet named. They do not need many words. The deepest rites of the land never do. Dagda is the body of Ireland, its heavy, warm, visible part, where grain grows, water runs, and cattle multiply. Morrigan is the soul of Ireland, its dark, sharp, invisible part, where the destiny of the country is decided before human beings see the first sign. When their voices join beside the river Unshin, it is not love in the mortal sense. It is the accord of land and fate, of harvest and war. of life and the price required to keep that life going. If they part in discord, the year will be dark. If they part in harmony, the fields will be full. War will end at the proper hour, and the people will still have bread upon their tables. Without Morrigan, the land has no soul. Without Dagda, the soul has no form. They are two heartbeats that together make the heart of Ireland. Perhaps that is why one of the most haunting images bound to Morrigan is that of the woman washing garments by the river. Twilight has just died behind the rocky hills. The water has begun to hold the cold purple of evening. Upon a low stone sits a woman in silence. A black cloak falls around her like night gathered into human shape. In her hand is a white garment. She dips it into the water, lifts it, and washes it slowly, patiently, as though time no longer has any meaning. But the water around the cloth slowly turns red. No one needs to come closer to understand. The owner of that garment will die in the battle to come. It is not a curse. It is not a punishment. It is simply the truth being revealed a little earlier than it otherwise would have been. From images like these, over many centuries, the figure of Morrigan gradually entered later folklore and merged into the archetype of the Banshee, the weeping woman who foretells death. But if you listen more closely, you will find that between these two figures there is not only fear, there is also pity. People in rural Ireland once said that on windy nights, before someone in the house died, they would hear a woman crying outside in the fields or by the window. Not a wild scream, but a sound sad to its deepest core, like water falling on stone, like wind through the crack of a wooden door, like a grief that knows what is coming and still cannot change it. They did not call it terror. They called it the compassion of Morrigan. When Christianity came to Ireland, many of the old gods were gradually replaced by saints, new miracles, and other stories. Some names sank like stones to the bottom of a lake. Some became children's tales told beside the hearth. But Morrigan did not truly disappear. She transformed. She stepped back and became part of tales about wandering spirits. The woman who foretells death, omens before disaster, cries in the night, and ravens on the roof. Her name was no longer spoken as clearly as before, yet she remained there, like a dark streak that cannot be erased from the sky of Ireland. Even in later centuries, people still passed along sayings spoken with equal parts fear and reverence. If you see a black raven circle 3 times above the roof, prepare yourself. If a raven lands on the fence post at dawn, light a candle and pray. Not because the raven is evil, but because the raven is a sign that something from the other side is looking toward this one. Many legends also say that before great battles, the rivers of Ireland would suddenly grow darker, as though a thin shadow were drifting over the water. Not because of blood, but because Morrigan had passed by. And so she is still there, in nights of hard wind over the highlands, in the cry of a lone raven against a purple sky, in the vague unease that comes when the future stands too close and human beings have not yet found words for it. The Celtic people understood this in a profound way. There is nothing truly terrifying in Morrigan except the truth she brings. She is the necessary darkness that keeps the world from becoming too gentle a dream. She is the night, so that Brigid may be dawn. She is the shadow, so that Dagda may be warm fire. She is the raven's wing, so that heroes may understand they do not fight for glory alone, but for something greater than themselves. Night over the highland has almost fallen completely silent now. The raven is no more than a small fading dot in the sky. The wind carries the scent of grass, of earth, of battles that ended long ago, and of prophecies not yet spoken aloud. You have met Brigid, the soft first light of the year. You have known Dagda, the abundance and warmth of the land. And now you have seen Morrígan, keeper of the gate of fate, where light and darkness touch. But Celtic mythology does not end there. For when the gods retreat into the mist, when the doors of the Sida close behind them, the soil of Ireland does not fall silent. On the contrary, another drumbeat begins to rise from deep beneath the ground, no longer the rhythm of gods, but the rhythm of human beings who carry within them one part ancient light and one part new darkness. Warriors swift as lightning, hearts that bind the mortal world to the other world. Human beings who will step forward when the gods step back. And from within that mist, the heroes are coming. When the Tuatha De Danann left the surface of the earth and withdrew into the seedy mounds, Ireland did not become desolate at once. There was no sound of collapse, no mountain split in two, no sun suddenly went out. Everything remained. The wind still moved across the grassy slopes. Rivers still ran among stone and moss, and Morrigan's ravens still flew over the dark, violet wilderness of late afternoon. But if one listened very carefully, one would notice that a certain kind of light had withdrawn. It was that fragile feeling once present in the air, as though one more step across the meadow might bring a human hand into contact with the hand of a god. Now, that doorway had closed. Ireland entered a long stillness, like a breath held inside the chest of the earth. But nature does not tolerate emptiness for long, nor does the universe allow stillness to remain motionless forever. When the gods withdrew into the mist, another rhythm began to rise from beneath the cold ground, from riverbanks, from grassy hills, from forests thick with mist, and even from within the hearts of the human beings newly born upon this island. It was no longer the rhythm of immortality, but a rhythm far fiercer, far more beautiful in a more painful way, the rhythm of heroes. They were not all-powerful like the gods who had once walked upon the earth before them. Their blood still ran. Their bones could still break. Their hearts still knew fear, love, loneliness, and despair. But precisely because of that, their radiance became closer to humanity. They stood between two shores of existence, carrying within themselves a remnant of the light of the other world, yet forced to live, fight, and die as real human beings. And among the names the wind of Ireland held on to for the longest time, two burned brighter than all others, like two very different stars in the same sky. Cú Chulainn and Fionn Macumhale. One was fire. One was moonlight. One was thunder racing across the sky of Ulster. One was a quiet lake holding the reflection of clouds and the secrets of the deep forest. The heroic age of Ireland began with them. Imagine a very early morning on the northern grasslands. The mist is so thick that the horizon disappears, and earth and sky seem fused together by a pale, cold whiteness. From within that mist, a child comes running. He is still very young, only about 8 years old. But his speed is such that the drops of mist are torn apart with each step he takes. Grass lashes aside. Birds, startled, burst from the bushes. No one can catch him, not the village children, not even the men who have grown up with northern winds and warfare. He runs as though his feet do not quite touch the ground, as though inside that small chest, his heart does not beat with the rhythm of ordinary humans, but with something swifter, brighter, and more ancient. That was Setanta, the child whom all Ireland would later call Cú Chulainn. Some destinies are marked by a first victory. Some destinies are named by an act that can never be taken back. Legend says that one day, when he was still a boy, Setanta was invited to the house of the smith Culann. The day was perhaps leaning toward evening. The light over the grass was low and golden. But when he arrived, the master of the house had released his enormous hound to guard the entrance. It was no ordinary beast. It had been raised like a living fortress, muscles rolling beneath its thick fur, its teeth gleaming cold like sharpened shards of bone. For any grown man, it would have been enough to force him to hesitate. But Setanta stood still for a single beat, his hand tightening around his small spear, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Then, in a moment so brief that almost no one understood what had happened, the hound fell dead. That moment might have become a triumph for a child to boast of. Had it been another child, but Setanta did not laugh. He did not gloat when he saw Culann's grief for the loyal beast that had died. He spoke only one simple sentence, very quiet, very direct, as though what he said were self-evident. "I will serve as your hound until you have another." And from that sentence, fate changed his name. Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Culann, a name that spoke not only of strength, but of responsibility, not merely of the one who kills, but of the one who understands the price of his own actions and is willing to carry it. Yet within that young body there was a secret deeper even than the name. His father was not merely a man of the mortal world. In Irish myth, Cú Chulainn was the son of Lug Lamfada, the god of light, the radiant warrior of the Tuatha De Danann. And perhaps for that reason, the older he grew, the more he resembled a flame too fierce to be held in mortal hands. As he entered adolescence, the power within him began to burst forth in a way that made even the most seasoned warriors step back. His eyes blazed like iron in a forge. His hair rose into red spikes like fire whipped backward by the wind. The muscles beneath his skin twisted and knotted, not in the balanced beauty of an ordinary human body, but as though within him a storm were trying to tear through flesh and break free. The Irish called it riastrad, the warp spasm, the battle frenzy. In that state, Cú Chulainn was no longer simply a young man. He became a storm wearing human form. And then the moment came, as every great legend must have a moment in which its fire proves its nature. Queen Medb of Connaught, with her pride and ambition sharp as metal, wished to seize the sacred brown bull of Cooley in order to balance her wealth and power with that of her husband. From that desire, war flared into being. It was not merely a struggle over cattle. It was a trial of honor, sovereignty, and the endurance of an entire land. While the men of Ulster were paralyzed by a curse at the very hour of greatest danger, only one person stood in the path of the advancing army: Cuchulainn. He was still very young then, almost still a boy, yet on the ground where the mist lifted slowly beneath the gray northern light, he stood as though the whole of Ulster had poured itself into the shape of a single body. Each day he challenged one warrior after another, according to the laws of honorable combat. Each day the clash of steel rang again along the riverbank, across the slopes, amid the rain-soaked thorns. Each evening he returned alone, blood running down his arms. Wounds opened at shoulder, thigh, and side, then lay down beneath some tree in the cold earth, with no music of victory, no laurel crown, no cheering crowd. There was only the night, wet grass, labored breath, and eyes still smoldering like embers, unwilling to die. He did not fight for reward, nor merely for fame. He fought for Ulster, for the land that had raised him, for his own oath, and perhaps for something deeper still. He understood that his life had been born for this very thing: to stand between darkness and what he loved until his body no longer possessed the strength to stand. In that war, Morrígan moved beside him like a dark cloud that never left, now a heifer blocking his path, now a wolf driving through the cattle, now an eel coiling around his leg in cold water, now an old woman with a face no one would notice. She tested his strength, his spirit, his heart, to see whether anything within that fierce flame would break when fate pressed against it. But Cuchulainn kept moving forward, like a spear hurled from the hand of destiny itself, until the final afternoon. The sky that day must have been heavy. The sun sank behind a wall of cloud, no longer strong enough to illuminate the battlefield. The grass beneath his feet was soaked with blood. Cuchulainn's body was studded with wounds like a tree after a storm. Yet his eyes had not gone dark. That was what frightened his enemies more than anything else. Not the strength still left in his hand, but the will that had not yet departed from his body. He knew he was about to die, but he also knew that a warrior of Ulster does not die on his knees. With the last of his strength, he dragged his ruined body to a great stone. Belts, fragments of broken armor, everything still hanging from him was used to bind him upright against the rock, not to live longer, but so that he would not fall before the eyes of the enemy. The wind moved across the battlefield as though trying to keep him with the world. Grass bent low at his feet like something bowing. The stone, cold, silent, and steadfast, became the last pillar supporting the dignity of a whole life. The enemy stood around him, but none dared draw near, for even in that final moment, Cuchulainn still looked unconquered, sword still in hand, body still upright, eyes still holding the last spark. Then a dark shape landed lightly upon his shoulder. Morrígan's raven. There was no weeping, no funeral horn, only that silent sign, and all of Ireland understood that a legend had just come to its close. Cuchulainn did not fall. He entered death standing, like a flame that refused to be extinguished and accepted only the choice of burning itself out completely. But Ireland did not give birth only to heroes like lightning. For if Cú Chulainn was fire rushing through the wind, then Fionn Macumhail was moonlight laid across a lake. If Cú Chulainn was explosive strength, then Fionn was wisdom gathered in silence like underground water within stone. This island understood that there are battles that cannot be won through muscle alone. There are darknesses that retreat only before understanding. And Fionn was the face of that kind of hero. He was born amid danger. His father was killed before he had the chance to grow. His mother had to flee with the child, crossing forest and mist to preserve his life. Fionn's childhood did not pass in a blazing hall or amid the sound of songs of victory, but among trees, stone, wind, and wise women cunning enough to teach a child how to survive by listening. He grew up with the scent of moss, the smell of rotting leaves, the sound of water running through roots, and the footsteps of beasts moving through the night. Those who raised him taught him everything both warrior and poet would need to know: how to read footprints in mist, how to hear the wind shift direction, how to look up at the sky and understand where time was moving, how to stay silent long enough for the forest itself to begin to trust him and speak its secrets. From very early on, Fionn was a child the forest accepted. Then came the story that would keep his name from ever fading out of Ireland's memory. Finnegis, the old poet and sage, had devoted almost his entire life to seeking a sacred salmon. The ancients believed that whoever ate it would absorb all the knowledge of the world, not knowledge drawn from books or battlefields, but from the deepest current of the universe itself. After years of waiting beside the river, he finally caught it. But when he told Fionn to cook it, fate chose another, while turning the fish above the fire. Fionn touched the hot fat with his finger and, by instinct, put his finger into his mouth. In that moment, wisdom rushed into him like floodwater breaking through a bank. There was no lightning flash, no sound of the sky splitting, only a quiet change that could never be undone. Finnegis looked into the young man's eyes and understood at once that fate had carried that gift to the one it had meant to choose. From then on, people said that whenever Fionn needed wisdom, he had only to place his thumb against his teeth, and understanding would rise within him like a flame in the dark. If Cú Chulainn was defined by the battlefield, then Fionn was defined by the night of Samhain at Tara. Every year, when the boundary between worlds grew thinnest, the monstrous island would come. He would play his enchanted harp or flute and cast the entire hall into sleep. Then burn Tara with his fire. No one could withstand that music, which drew the soul away from wakefulness. No one, until Fionn stood forward. Imagine the great hall on the night of Samhain. The fire burns low. Shadows stretch long across the walls. Outside, the wind moves over Tara's hill like the whisper of worlds touching one another. Then Island's music begins, beautiful to the point of terror, thin as mist, yet seeping into the marrow. One by one, those around him sink down, heads bowed, eyes closing, as though the entire chamber were slowly being drowned in black water. Only Fionn struggles to remain awake. he uses the tip of his spear against his own flesh, letting pain pull him back from the edge of sleep. And when Ailinn comes near, too confident in the music that had lulled Tara for so many years, Fionn bursts out of the darkness and ends the terror at last. From that night on, he became the leader of the Fianna. The Fianna were not a king's army. They did not belong wholly to a great hall, nor to a throne. They lived among forests, paths, marshes, and rocky hills, like wandering warriors guarding Ireland from monsters, invaders, and curses creeping out of the otherworld. Yet what set them apart was not only strength. To join the Fianna, one had to prove that one could both fight and love beauty. They had to be swift, enduring, and sharp. But they also had to know how to compose poetry, how to keep the rhythm of a song, how to respect the forest and listen to the voices of the earth in the Celtic imagination. A perfect warrior was not a killing machine. He was one who could hold a spear in one hand and a song in his heart with the other. And Fionn was born to lead such people. Beside him stood Oisin, the son who carried within himself both warfare and poetry in Ireland's memory. Oisin appears like a fragile bridge connecting the mortal world to the land of eternal youth. It was Oisin who followed Niamh into Tir na Nog. Living in that country where time does not move in step with human life, only to return one day and find that the Fianna had vanished, and the Ireland he remembered had drifted away like a dream. Through Oisin's story, the Celts reminded one another that glory, love, youth, and memory can all be bent by time in ways human beings never expect. If you gaze long enough at these two figures, you begin to see that Ireland placed two different parts of its soul within them. Cú Chulainn is the flame that rises fast, blinding, fierce, willing to burn his whole life away in one instant of loyalty to an oath. Fionn is the steadier, gentler light, like the moon crossing many winters and still remaining on the face of the lake, keeping wisdom, compassion, and the ability to see farther than the anger of the moment. One protects Ulster with blood. One protects Ireland with understanding, with song, with the effort to preserve a place under the sky for those who live free. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing in Celtic mythology. After the gods withdrew, the world did not become poorer. It merely changed the way it glowed, from the ageless light of the Tuatha De Danann. Ireland passed into a light more painful yet more intimate. The light that comes from human courage when human beings know they are finite and still choose to live and fight as though their souls were worth more than fear. When you close your eyes, you can almost hear them, the strong, swift, violent footfalls of Cú Chulainn upon dew-wet grass, the slower, more patient steps of Fionn passing through the deep forest, the laughter of the Fianna around the campfire, the distant music of Oisin drifting in the mist. All of it joins into a melody Ireland has never forgotten. Though empires have come and gone, though religions have covered this land in new layers of names, the gods withdrew into the Sita, but the heroes stepped onto the stage of memory, and they prove something every great mythology understands very well. It is not only gods who create legend. Sometimes it is precisely human beings whose hearts know how to burn, how to ache, and how to remain faithful until the final moment that make an entire island remember itself across thousands of years. But our journey does not end there. For behind the gods, behind the heroes, behind the battlefields and the songs, Celtic mythology still keeps another door. A door opening downward into a world of deeper mist, of dream, of spirit, of a place that is neither God nor human, but something suspended between every boundary. And now we are about to descend into it. If Ireland is the land of white mists drifting across the meadows like the breath of gods, then Wales is like a dream woven from deep blue and gentle darkness. There, the hills do not stand still like ordinary hills and mountains. They roll in vast frozen waves, as though this whole land had once been the sea, and one day was turned to stone in the very act of rising. Wind slips through the narrow, long, cold mountain passes, making a sound like the breathing of a memory that has lived too long. And the black pine forests, with their straight and silent trunks, look like tireless guardians who have stood there since before human beings learned how to name the sky. You are walking through that land at night. There is no moon, only a thin and dim light, like embers left behind from fires that went out long ago. The ground beneath your feet feels strangely soft, not quite mud, and not merely moss. It feels as though beneath that layer of grass and damp earth, an entire other world lies still, asleep, listening to your every step, waiting only for the right moment to open its eyes. Then the forest ahead suddenly parts. There is no sound of branches breaking, no rustle of leaves, only that dense mass of darkness drawing back without warning, revealing a round clearing, as if some invisible hand had gently pressed into the heart of the night. At the center of that clearing lies a thin veil of mist close to the earth. It is so smooth, so still, that it looks like a mirror, not reflecting the sky, but reflecting somewhere else, somewhere that does not belong to the world beneath your feet. Every sound disappears. No more birds of the night. No more wind threading through the pines. No footsteps except your own. And then even those seem to be swallowed by the mist. And in that absolute stillness, you hear a call. Not a human voice. Not the cry of an animal. Not quite music, yet not entirely sound. It is like the noise an invisible door would make if it were opening between two worlds. A sound so delicate, so distant, and yet enough for your whole body to understand that what lies before you is no longer the forest of Wales. This is a threshold. The threshold of Annwn, the other world of Wales. Not heaven in the way later religions imagined it. Not hell with its fires and punishments. Not a place of reward, nor of judgment. Annwn is a realm existing in parallel, soft as deep sleep after many long nights without rest. Peaceful to the point that even time itself, upon entering, seems to slow, loosen, and dissolve like rainwater falling upon a lake. You step forward, and the instant your foot passes through that veil of mist, the world changes. The path beneath your feet is covered in green moss, but it is not damp or slippery like the moss of the mortal world. It is soft, like a carpet woven from fine fur and light. Each step sinks just enough, as though you were walking upon a cloud pressed into the shape of a human footpath. No darkness chases you from behind. No sound warns of danger. Everything is strangely still, yet not the kind of silence that unsettles. It is a gentle stillness, the kind of stillness the mortal world rarely allows, because in the human world, even in deepest sleep, the heart still carries tomorrow's anxieties. But in Annwn, anxiety seems unable to find its way in. The meadow opens before you, so green that the color no longer seems to belong to grass, but to some pure state of life itself. Clear streams thread between banks of wildflowers. The water there is cool, but not cold. It touches the skin like consolation. The old Welsh said that if you drank from those streams, weariness would leave your soul for many years, as though the body had been relieved of all the invisible burdens life had once forced it to carry. In those meadows, the harvest never withers. Fruit ripens red upon the branch, yet never falls. Flowers bloom, yet never fade. Fields of grain stand golden beneath the mild light, and no storm ever bends them low. This is not the fierce vitality of wild nature. It is life brought to its most perfect form, where beauty no longer has to pay for itself in time, where all things remain in the most radiant moment of their own being, never pushed toward decay. And the light in Annwn is different too. It does not come from the sun, nor from fire. It seems to rise from the very air itself, a light soft, warm, and even, settling over everything like a wool blanket in winter, like a grandmother's hand long ago gently pulling the covers up to your shoulder in the middle of the night. That light never dazzles. It casts no shadow. It simply embraces all things, making every outline gentler, nearer, and more forgiven. Somewhere very far away, music begins to sound. Not the music of a noisy hall or a festive celebration, only tones as delicate as pollen carried by the wind. A harp ringing faintly in the distance, a flute melody hidden among the trees, the soft voice of strings gliding like water across a still lake. That music does not stir excitement, nor does it tear at the heart like a lament. It does something stranger than that. It comforts. It lets the most beautiful memories of life rise slowly to the surface, while wounds, weariness, and the fractures left by living sink quietly to the bottom. In Annwn, pain does not vanish through dramatic magic. It simply no longer needs to remain. A soul entering this place is like a soul returned to its first form, lighter, clearer, thinner, like morning mist before the sun has time to touch it. And here, time is no longer a rushing current carrying all things into age. It is like the surface of a morning lake, still, transparent, ready to reflect back the most beautiful version of you, without being warped by fear, regret, or years. That is why Annwn is not only a place for the dead, it is also the deepest dream of the living, the dream of a place where life no longer demands endurance, a place that keeps only the most beautiful part of the soul and allows that part to rest. But Annwn is not an innocent realm. It is beautiful, but not simple, peaceful, but by no means lawless. Every gentleness here is held within a hidden order, just as a lake is so calm only because a great depth lies beneath it. To understand Annwn, you must understand the one who keeps its heartbeat. Annwn, if Dagda is the warmth of the earth in the Irish tradition, then Annwn is the still depth of Welsh darkness. He is not an evil god, not a tyrant of the dead. He is a just king, calm, mysterious, and possessed of the kind of majesty that needs no raised voice to make all fall silent. In the old tales, Annwn often appears as a tall man in a black cloak, flowing like night itself in motion. His eyes shine like embers banked deep beneath ash, not flaring into flame, yet enough for anyone who looks into them to know that power dwells there. Annwn's presence is not violent. It is like a mountain, like black water beneath a cliff, like deep night in a place without villages. When human beings suddenly understand that they are standing before something far greater than themselves, Annwn rules Annwn not through fear, but through balance. He keeps darkness from swallowing all light. He keeps light from erasing the sacredness of darkness. He keeps souls from losing their way. He keeps life from spilling over into everything and turning this realm into nothing more than another version of the mortal world. For Annwn understands that a lasting world cannot consist of comfort alone. It must also have limits, discipline, and truth. That is seen most clearly in the story of Pwyll, Prince of Dyfed, a tale that unfolds as though Annwn itself had chosen one human being to reveal its true nature. That day, Pwyll was hunting in a forbidden forest. Perhaps evening was beginning to descend, the branches dark with dampness, the hounds breathing mist in the cold, the sound of hooves striking wet ground. And then, in a moment that seemed small, he unknowingly offended Annwn. For other gods or kings, such an act might have led to wrath, revenge, or war. But Annwn chose a far stranger path. Exchange places with me for a year and a day. Rule Annwn in my stead. And on the final day, fight Halfdan in my place. This was not merely a challenge. It was an invitation to pass through the veil between the human world and the other realm. Pwyll accepted, and so, a prince of the mortal world stepped onto the throne of Annwn. A year there must have felt like dwelling inside a dream too beautiful, forcing a man to keep reminding himself not to forget his oath. Annwn's palace was full of feasts, music, gentle light, and a richness beyond anything the earth could match. But what made Pwyll worthy was not that he enjoyed its beauty, but that he did not allow himself to forget his duty amid all that enchantment. Then the final day came. Halfdan, Annwn's rival, appeared like a trial Annwn had preserved for a very long time. The battle did not unfold like a storm of chaos. There was something solemn about it, something ritualistically exact, as though the space around them were waiting to see whether a promise would be fulfilled completely or not. Annwn had told Pwyll that only one blow was needed, no more, no less, and Pwyll did exactly that. One strike, precise, absolute, with no excess anger and no lack of resolve. Halfdan fell. Annwn was made one. Annwn returned to his throne. And from that day forward, he called Pwyll by a title not meant for ornament, but to mark something rare: Pen Annwn, head of Annwn. The one who understood that this realm was not a place for sin, but a place of discipline, truth, and a deeper balance than human beings usually imagine. Perhaps that is why the Welsh never thought of Annwn as a simple location upon a map. It may be the Western Land, where sea and mist merge until no horizon remains. It may be a valley hidden beneath fog all year long. It may be an island concealed in ocean cloud. It may be a hollow hill that opens only on certain nights. Annwn is not fixed in one place, because it belongs more to the condition of the soul than to the geography of the earth. People say that sometimes. If the mist is so thick you can no longer hear your own footsteps, you may wander into Annwn without realizing it. Sometimes the sound of a harp or a flute in the night is enough to turn a soul toward another path. Sometimes the western sea calls very softly, and if you keep walking into the mist, touching the water's face, you will arrive where spring never ends. Annwn is always very near, but only near to those who are inwardly searching for it. And just as Ireland has the cry of the Banshee, Wales has the Cuiún Annwn, the white hounds with ears red as fresh blood beneath snow. They race across the meadows like wind, hunting not the innocent, but lost souls, those who have strayed too far from the boundary between life and death. To hear them bark is a strange experience. The old people said that if the barking seems to be growing nearer, the hounds are in fact moving away. And if the barking seems to fade into the distance, then they are drawing very close. Even their sound runs contrary to the habits of the human world. For Annwn is always like that, always carrying within itself a gentle opposition between light and dark, near and far, comfort and warning. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about Annwn is that it does not turn death into horror. It places death within another space, where the soul need not fight any longer in order to find peace. For the bards of Wales, Annwn was the place where leaves do not fall, where the music never breaks, where human beings recover their true names. It is an image so soft, so deep, and so beautifully sorrowful that it feels like the memory of a home we may never truly have lived in. And yet the heart recognizes it the moment it enters. And then, like every doorway to the other world, Annwn does not keep you forever in that first moment. The mist slowly closes again. The mossy paths retreat into the distance. The music grows thinner, as though it were withdrawing somewhere behind the wind. You step back from that threshold, and the Welsh forest appears once more as it was before. The trees stand still. Night returns to its ordinary shape. The air is filled again with wind, leaves, and human footsteps, and yet you know that something has changed, even if only very slightly, because you have just passed through a place that not everyone can touch. The Welsh have a beautiful saying, Annwn is not below, Annwn is behind everything. Behind sleep, behind longing, behind tears, behind the quiet sigh of a human being when life has become too weary to bear. It is the final destination to which the soul does not need to struggle its way. Not a trial, not a sentence, only a very long rest. And when you return to the mortal world, you carry something back from that realm, a peace too difficult to name, a feeling of acceptance, a quiet understanding that loss is not the final enemy, and somewhere behind all pain, all separation, all the heavy days of life, there is always a place like Annwn waiting, gentle, deep, not loudly calling, yet never truly closed. Imagine that you are standing in the countryside of Ireland on a night in October, when autumn has gone deep enough for everything to begin taking on the beauty of decay. Wind slips through the bare hills, sweeping low across the grass, carrying the scent of damp earth, rotting leaves, and old rains still lingering somewhere within the stones. The full moon spills silver over thatched roofs, over moss-covered stone walls, over the narrow winding road running through the fields like a gray thread forgotten in the night. Everything is strangely still, so still that it feels as though time itself has just been held between two heartbeats. There is no sound of wheels, no voices calling out, only the wind moving through the cracks in the walls, the grass brushing softly against itself, and a silence so deep that if someone were to speak, the whole night would seem to shatter like the surface of water. Then, within that very stillness, a sound begins to rise, not loud, not sharp, not sudden. It trembles like a small flame in a dark room, seeming at one moment ready to die, then flaring faintly before dimming again. A cry. Sometimes it sounds like a woman sobbing far away, sometimes like wind being strangled in a crack of stone. Sometimes the sound carries the color of music, low and sorrowful, as though an invisible hand had just passed across strings vibrating in the dark. It is not the voice of the living, not the voice of the wind, nor the cry of any being still walking upon this earth. It is the cry of the Banshee, Banshee, the woman of the mound, Ireland's fairy herald of death. In the old villages, people believed that if that cry touched the window of a house, if it slipped through a crack in the door, if it paused ever so softly outside the stone wall of a family, then within that house a soul was preparing to leave the world. And if one listened deeply enough, long enough, it could almost seem as though the cry were not weeping for one person alone, but calling the name of an entire bloodline rooted in the soil of Ireland for centuries. But the strangest thing about the Banshee is that she never truly carries the nature of a demon. She kills no one. She brings no calamity. She does not walk across the meadow bearing a scythe like the terrifying image of death imagined by so many other cultures. The Banshee does only one thing. She warns that death is drawing near. That is all. Nothing more, nothing less. The Irish call her Banshee, the woman of the mound. But the mound here is not merely a cold burial place. It is the Sida, the sacred earthen mounds, the thresholds leading into the other world, where the Tuatha De Danann withdrew after leaving the surface of the earth. And so the Banshee is not a wandering ghost or an evil spirit. She belongs more nearly to the fairy world. She is like one final remnant of the old divine age, a soft and sorrowful figure from a mythical era that has not yet fully vanished from Ireland. Her cry, therefore, is not entirely a cry of grief. It is a warning full of compassion, as though she comes to give a family one final night, one more hour, one more silence, just long enough for an apology to be spoken, for forgiveness to be given, for hands to be held a little longer. so that a soul may not cross the final threshold in bewilderment or solitude. In Irish folk memory, not every family has its own banshee, only the oldest bloodlines, the clans bound to the land for hundreds of years, the names carrying within them the old history of the island, were believed to have a messenger from the other world watching over them. People often spoke of families such as the O'Neills, the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the O'Gradys, the O'Donnells. Each family had only one banshee, one cry, one figure, one spirit guarding the boundary between the continuation of a bloodline and the moment when one name is called to the other side. To the old Irish, that was not a curse, it was an honor. For to have a banshee meant that the family was not nameless in the eyes of time. It meant there was an invisible presence that still remembered them, still witnessed each generation growing up, loving, quarreling, growing old, and passing away. The banshee is the keeper of the family record without parchment, the witness of blood, the one who cannot save death, but will not allow death to arrive unnoticed. No one describes the banshee in one fixed form, like mist, like wind, like memory. She changes according to what she brings. Sometimes she appears as a beautiful young woman with long hair and a pale white robe like moonlight. Her face is delicate, almost translucent, yet her eyes are so sorrowful that anyone who looks at her feels she has wept for centuries. This is the form people often associate with a gentle death, a passing as soft as sleep. When the soul leaves the body without too violent a struggle against pain, sometimes she appears as a middle-aged woman, her face stern and still. There is no enchanting beauty, nor any withering frailty, only certainty, a look enough to make one understand that what must come has already come, and no plea can turn the river from its course. And then at times the banshee appears as an old woman with silver hair, reddened eyes, and narrow shoulders wrapped in a dark garment wet with mist. Her cry in such moments is sharp as a blade slipping through the night, not because she is cruel, but because her pity has filled so completely that it can no longer do anything but tremble into sound. The Irish believed that all three forms are one, just as Morrígan can be at once a raven, a young woman, and an old crone. So the banshee too is a spirit bearing many shades of fate. Her essence does not change. She remains the final messenger at the boundary between life and death. And her cry is unlike any sound of the earthly world. Not the howl of a wild beast in the night, not the wind moaning through a crack in the door, not the sound of a woman weeping for a lost husband or child. It has been described as the sound of a string snapping in the dark, as the call of someone summoning a loved one from a place too far away to cross back from, as the sound of a river weeping when winter reaches the water. It is not loud, yet it goes straight into the heart. It does not need to carry far, because its purpose is not for everyone to hear it, but for the one who must hear it to mistake it for nothing else. The old people said that if you heard the banshee crying from very far away, the death would be a gentle one. If the cry sounded very near, then death was already standing outside the door, and if someone heard the banshee as though she were calling their very name, then that person had little time left upon the earth, And yet no one says that the Banshee ever speaks evil. No one says that she curses anyone. She grieves only for humankind. She grieves for what cannot be avoided. And very often, she appears near water, by an ancient well covered in moss, beside a narrow stream running through the night grass, at the edge of a still pond reflecting gray clouds, or by a small river where the water lies black as ink beneath the moon. The Celts believed that water is the boundary between worlds. It reflects not only the face, but the soul. Perhaps that is why so many legends say that the Banshee sits beside the water to comb her hair with a silver comb, letting tears fall upon the surface of the lake in tiny ripples. And in each drop rests a sorrowful story of the family she is guarding. If a mortal should happen to see her in that moment, what they receive is not exactly an image. It is more like a feeling, a cold and piercing certainty that in some family, somewhere nearby, someone is about to depart. There are tales of the Banshee so old that no one remembers where memory ends and legend begins. One of the most famous is the night Lady Fanshawe was awakened in the castle of the O'Briens. Imagine that cold stone chamber, the sky covered in cloud, beyond the window, the garden utterly dark, without moonlight, save for a little glow from the hearth flickering against the walls like trembling shadows. Midnight passed slowly. Then she heard the beating of wings against the air, as though something were struggling to tear through the silence draped over the whole castle. Then came the cry, thin, resonant, deep as a sorrow buried beneath the earth for too long, only now finding a way to rise into the face of the night. Lady Fanshawe went to the window. Her hand drew the curtain aside, and there, upon the sill itself, she saw a woman in a white dress, her hair blown wildly by the wind, her face pale as though it had never touched the sun. Her eyes were deep and wet, like the eyes of one who had wept for an entire lifetime. She opened her mouth, yet the lament seemed to come not from her lips, but from all the darkness around the castle. A few moments later, the figure dissolved into the night the way breath disappears upon cold glass. The next morning, news arrived. The Lord O'Brien had died at the very hour she heard the cry. From that time on, the O'Brien family believed that their Banshee still passed by the window whenever fate called the name of one of their blood. The O'Neills kept a different memory. In their castle, with its corridors long as a maze, its trembling candlelight, and walls holding centuries of Irish history within them, the servants said that, on fated nights, when everyone was asleep, they would hear the soft brushing of skirts across the stone floor. Slow, even, like the breathing of someone thinking upon something very sad. No one saw her enter. No one saw her leave. She was simply there, in the center of the corridor, where the light was dimmest. Then she sang. Not a joyful song, not a lullaby, but a sad ballad, slow and long, full of mourning for a soul about to leave the earth. Those in the house could hear the melody, yet none ever heard the words clearly, as though the song was not meant for the living, but for the one about to pass through the final door. And whenever her singing rose, every candle in the castle trembled, as though even the stone walls themselves were listening. The next morning, The O'Neill family would once again be in mourning. And then there is the tale of the silver comb. An old man lived beside a small stream and was accustomed to rising early to fetch water for his family. One morning, when the new day had only just barely touched the water's surface, he saw a silver comb lying among the wet moss. It was strangely beautiful, engraved with Celtic spirals, glittering like an object that did not belong in mortal hands. Thinking someone must have dropped it, he took it home that night when the whole house was asleep. There came a knock at the door, not hard, not urgent, only steady, very soft, like the cold fingers of someone touching the wood. He opened the door. In the dim, clouded moonlight stood a woman. Her robe was blue like the sea on the verge of a storm. Her long black hair hung down over her shoulders. Her eyes were wet, as though one more breath of wind would make the tears fall. She spoke so softly that the wind nearly carried her words away. "You have taken what is mine." At once, the old man returned the comb. She smiled, and it was such a sorrowful smile that he would remember it for the rest of his life. The instant the comb touched her hand, her whole form dissolved like morning mist, and immediately afterward, the cry rang across the empty fields. The next morning, he learned that a neighbor from one of the old families of the region had died at midnight. 3 stories, 3 cries, 3 families, yet all of them show one striking truth about the Banshee. She does not bring death. She brings the compassion of the other world to the living. Perhaps that is why many later scholars believed the Banshee to be a folkloric form of Morrígan. Both are women who foretell death. Both are linked to water, to forms that shift between youth and age, to cries, to ravens, and to omens that require no explanation. And most importantly, neither of them kills directly. They only guard the boundary. They only stand at the final threshold and tell human beings that a soul is about to be called away. Of course, there are still differences between them. Morrígan is larger, carrying within her war, sovereignty, and the destiny of an entire land. The Banshee is more intimate, more private, bound to each bloodline, each household, each individual name. But at the deepest level, they do the same work. They soften death. And that may be one of the most humane ideas in the Irish imagination. Many cultures see death as a terrifying and abrupt rupture. But the Irish seem unwilling to accept that a soul should step to the other side with no one waiting at the threshold. In that world, death does not arrive alone. It is guided, it is caught, it is foretold. It is surrounded by a sorrow so gentle, so ancient, so close to tenderness. The Banshee is the form that tenderness takes. She does not come to frighten people. She comes so that they may prepare, not to cast darkness over a family, but to say that no one truly departs in solitude. Some old Irish families even believed that if one ought to have heard the Banshee and yet heard nothing at all, that was what was truly frightening. For absolute silence could mean that death came too quickly. The soul had no time to prepare. The family had no chance to reconcile, and grief had no witness. So the cry of the Banshee was not always regarded as an evil omen. It was like a rite of passage, a rite never written down, yet carried out generation after generation in the darkness of Ireland. As the night deepens, as the wind from the sea slips through the old stone walls. There are sounds that only those who truly belong to this place know how to hear. A cry like a breath splitting in the chest. A voice calling a name so faintly it is almost not a word. The sound of cloth brushing past a doorway, footsteps passing through an empty corridor, a sigh rising as though from time itself. That is not fear. That is memory. Across hundreds of years, the Banshee has wept for countless souls. That cry has seeped into the blood of Ireland as rain seeps into stone, as mist clings to branches, as wind writes the story of ancestors across the hills. She is the reader of the final family record, the cry joining one generation to the next, the compassion given to death, the reminder that every family has a story, and every story will one day come to the ending that cannot be avoided. Tonight, if you hear the wind change direction, if you suddenly feel a shiver while looking toward a distant burial mound, if, for one fleeting moment, you feel that someone has just passed your window without leaving any footprints, then perhaps, somewhere in the thin Irish mist, the Banshee has passed by, carrying the final message for a soul preparing to leave the world. And in Ireland, people still say to one another a very beautiful thing. The Banshee does not weep because of death. She weeps because love remains, even after death has come. Imagine yourself standing on the Irish Highlands on the final night of October, when the year has tilted fully toward darkness. The wind moves past your ears like a broken song, echoing back from a lost age. Now clear, now faint, as though someone were singing far beyond the hills, only to let the melody dissolve into the mist. The fields before you are dark as a moonless sea. The sky hangs low, heavy with cloud, allowing through only a few lonely stars, fragile as the last sparks left behind after a great fire has long since burned out. This is not an ordinary autumn night. Even someone who has never heard of Celtic mythology could feel it. The air is different. The silence is different. The ground beneath your feet feels softer, deeper, as though beneath the damp grass and the cold soil there were not only roots and stone, but memory, old footsteps, spirits still lying in rest who have never entirely left this place. On such a night, the mist between the world of the living and the world of the dead becomes so thin it feels as though it could almost be touched with the tips of your fingers. The Celts called that moment Samhain, not a cheerful festival in the way later ages imagined it, not a noisy feast, not a simple harvest rite. Samhain is a threshold. It is the night when the door between worlds parts open. It is when human beings feel their ancestors walking the very roads the cattle crossed by day. Feel the breath of the dead somewhere very near the hearth. Feel the universe grow wider than usual, and themselves grow smaller within it. Everything on the night of Samhain seems to hold its breath. The blades of grass bend lower beneath the wind. The hills become dark and still like the backs of ancient creatures sleeping. The firelight inside the house burns brighter against the stone walls, not because it is stronger, but because the darkness beyond has drawn closer, and human beings, no matter how brave, no matter how many battles or storms they have lived through, will still feel that something ancient, immense, and impossible to name is passing near their world. In the old Celtic calendar, Samhain did not sit in the middle of the year. It was the door into the new year itself. The Celts did not divide time as we do, into 4 neat and balanced seasons. To them, the year was like one great breath of the earth and sky, with only 2 clear halves, the bright season and the dark one. Samhain is the first night of the dark season, not the season of despair, but the season of rest, withdrawal, stillness, and return. It is the moment when the harvest has been gathered in. The last sheaves have been carried home. The cattle are no longer left on the distant fields, but brought into shelter. Families begin collecting wood, rekindling the household fire, preparing for the long and bitter months ahead. Yet deeper than all those practical preparations lies a spiritual one. Samhain reminds people that light does not vanish, it only withdraws, that life does not end, it only passes through another door. In the Celtic imagination, death is never a cold, final full stop. It is more like a journey, a step into another chamber of the universe. And Samhain is the night when the door between those 2 chambers opens. Light as breath. Picture a small stone house in the Irish countryside many centuries ago. Outside, the wind sweeps across moss-covered stone fences. Inside, the red fire in the hearth crackles and glows. A family sits gathered around a simple meal. There is bread, there is warm milk, there is a little salted meat saved for the colder days. But tonight, among the familiar chairs, one place has been left empty. No one sits there. No one touches the bowl of milk set before it, because that chair is for the dead. The old Irish believed that on the night of Samhain, the ancestors do not return to demand grief or tears. They return to look upon their family, to bless the coming winter, to stand close to their descendants for a few brief hours while the boundary between the 2 worlds weakens. Leaving an empty place at the table is not merely symbolic. It is an act full of love and reverence. It is as though the living are saying to the dead that the door was never fully closed, that in this house, in this fire, in this memory, there is still a place for them. Some families would even leave the window slightly open, though the cold wind might come in, not out of carelessness, but because they believed that a spirit returning from a long journey would need a way to find the old home again. Some left a single glowing ember before the threshold, burning red in the night like a small lighthouse. A tiny light, but enough to tell the departed that this is still home. This is still the place where they are remembered. This is still the place to which they may return. Samhain, then, has never been only a night of darkness. It is a night of reunion. On that night, memory becomes more alive than usual. Mothers remember their own mothers' hands. Fathers remember voices that fell silent many years ago. Children are told stories of grandparents they never met. And suddenly, those names no longer feel distant. Because tonight, those souls may be standing very near, just beyond the wind passing through the door. But Samhain does not open the way only for the ancestors. The Celts believed that when the door parts open, it is not only gentle spirits who may cross. wandering souls, beings of the other world, creatures whose names human beings should never speak too loudly in the dark. All of them may come nearer to the world of the living than at any other time. Not all of them are evil. Not all of them are kind. They are simply free, and for that reason. Samhain is a night of two feelings existing side by side, welcome and caution. That is why the great fires are lit. Imagine, in the middle of an open field, under the force of a bitter night wind, a Samhain fire rising up. At first, there are only a few points of glowing ember. Then the wood begins to catch, the crackling grows louder, and soon a whole pillar of golden-orange flame stands upright in the darkness. Firelight sweeps across faces, stone, grass, and the retreating folds of mist. Children stand close to the older ones. The old gaze into the fire as though looking at something older even than language. That fire is not only there for warmth, it has a purpose. It drives away hostile beings. It lights the road for the ancestors. It purifies the living space. It gathers the whole community into a single heart in the middle of nature's vast night. People leap over the flames to cleanse themselves of the old year's misfortune. They circle the fire as though moving around a sacred center of the world. And in the midst of it all, the Samhain fire is like a crimson heartbeat pounding for the whole community, binding human beings to earth, to sky, and to all that the eyes cannot see, but the soul can feel. On that night, those who keep the rites step most clearly into view, the Druids. Modern imagination often remembers Druids only as shadowy magicians of the deep forest. But to the Celts, they were much more than that. They were keepers of law, healers, preservers of unwritten knowledge, figures standing between human beings and the invisible forces of nature. And Samhain was one of their most powerful nights. By the great fire, the Druids watched how the flame rose, how the smoke leaned, how the ashes scattered, how the wood cracked or choked. In those signs, they read the harvest, the fate of cattle, the dangers of the coming year, and all that the community needed to avoid, prepare for, or ask protection against. There were ancient rites that later survived only in fragments of memory, such as the burning of animal bones in thanksgiving for the harvest, creating the bone fire that over time became bonfire. The smoke from it was seen as a prayer rising to the other world. The ashes were carried back to each home as a blessing of protection, a fragment of sacred fire to keep the household safe through the dark season. There was another rite even more beautiful in its meaning. The people extinguished every old fire in their homes, all of them. They allowed darkness to pass through the kitchen for a brief moment. Then, after the Samhain rite, they carried new embers home from the communal fire and kindled their hearths again, as though the old year had been left behind, as though every family were beginning again with a flame purer, newer, born from the same sacred heart in the middle of the field. But Samhain is not only the night of waiting for spirits to arrive. It is also the night when human beings must learn how to pass through darkness without letting darkness recognize them. That is the deep origin of disguise. Today, people dress in costume for amusement, for play, for creativity, but for the ancient Celts, hiding one's face on the night of Samhain was a rite of survival. They believed that if a being from the other world recognized you as living, it might follow you home, trouble your family, or lure you into a mist-covered road from which there is no return. And so, the safest thing was not to appear with your true face at all. Imagine the village roads of Ireland on that night, beneath the pale moon and the distant firelight. Figures move with faces no longer truly human. Some wear rough wooden masks, twisted and frightening. Some drape animal skins across their shoulders, carrying with them the smell of the deep forest. Some smear ash and charcoal across their faces in dark streaks that distort their real features. Some wear straw hats, grass caps, or thorn branches in their hair so that they look like creatures from the wild fields. They do not do this as a joke. They do it to merge with the darkness, so that when the spirits look their way, they cannot tell who is living and who belongs to the night, so that they may pass through Samhain without being named by what should never name them. On that night, human beings understand something very deep, sometimes, to survive. One must know how to remain anonymous before the unseen. Then there are the lights. Today, people think of pumpkins carved into crooked grins, but the ancient Celts had no pumpkins. They used turnips, hollowed-out turnips with coals or small candles set inside, carved into strange faces. Light shone through their eye sockets and jagged mouths, turning an ordinary root vegetable into something like a watchful face. These lanterns were placed by the door, on the threshold, or carried through the night to guide the ancestors, drive away harmful spirits, and warn passing beings that this house was already guarded by a spirit. Later, the legend of Jack-o'-lantern merged with this custom, and when the Irish emigrated to America, pumpkins replaced turnips because they were easier to find, larger, and more vivid beneath candlelight. But at its deepest core, that lantern still remains the sign of a night when the living hang light before the darkness and negotiate with it. When Christianity spread strongly through Ireland and the Celtic lands, the Church could not erase nights like Samhain altogether. They had sunk too deeply into the rhythm of life, into memory, into the spirit of the people. So instead of destroying them, they covered them with a new garment. All Saints' Day was placed at the beginning of November. The night before became All Hallows' Eve, and little by little, the name Halloween was born. But a changed name does not mean the old soul vanishes. Beneath the Christian surface, beneath centuries of change, Samhain remained. It was still the night when spirits returned, still the night when human beings remembered their ancestors, still the night when fire burned brighter than usual, still the hour when darkness ceased to be only darkness and became a space for listening to what the daylight world conceals. When the Irish and the Scots brought that tradition to America, it entered a new world. There, the towns were larger, the streets brighter, the communities more mixed, costumes became more theatrical, lanterns more colorful. Children went from asking for food to asking for sweets. Film, commerce, and festivity layered new colors onto the old night. Modern Halloween was born, brighter, louder, filled with more laughter. Yet if you listen carefully beneath all those layers, you can still hear the old heartbeat of Samhain, the night when the living remember they do not live alone. The night when the dead are remembered as part of the family, not as a wound that vanished. The night when darkness is not the enemy, but the place that holds the voices of ancestors, of earth, of time. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing Samhain left behind. It teaches human beings to respect death without worshiping fear. It teaches that the dark season is as necessary as the bright one. It teaches that there are times in the year, in life, in the soul, when we do not need to fight at once to drive the darkness away. We only need to sit beside the fire, listen to it, and realize that even within darkness there is still light, not dazzling, not loud, but enough to guide the way. When you walk across the hills of Ireland on a final night of October, perhaps you can still feel that, the Samhain fire. Though it now survives only in memory, seems still to burn somewhere beneath the ashes of time. The wind still carries the scent of earth, of sea, of one season dying so another may begin. Children may laugh in bright costumes. Adults may hang pumpkin lanterns by the door, yet in a deeper corner of the night, very deep and very still, the empty chair is still there at the table for the ancestors. The door is still slightly open, and so is the belief that no one truly disappears from this world if they are still remembered with love. Because, after all, the Celts understood something that human beings are forever forgetting and remembering again, remembering and forgetting again. Darkness is not there to be feared. Darkness is there to be listened to. And in that darkness, if you are quiet enough, slow enough, still enough to hear, Samhain is still whispering, as it has whispered for thousands of years across the cold, windy hills of Ireland. I am still here. As we come to the end of tonight's journey, I hope you have felt something truly beautiful at the heart of Celtic mythology, that even as thousands of years pass, human beings are always searching for a way to remain connected to what is most sacred, to family, to ancestors, and to memories that never truly fade. Samhain is not only the origin of Halloween, it is a reminder that we belong to something greater than ourselves, a vast current in which life and death are merely two breaths of the same universe. I believe that within each of us there is a part that longs to be remembered, longs to stay connected, longs to believe that love can endure even beyond the dark. Celtic stories show me that we are never truly alone, not even in our quietest moments. If this story has touched your heart, please leave a comment below. Please like and subscribe to the channel so that I can continue bringing you other journeys, other moments of peace, mystery, and meaning, like the one we have shared tonight. Thank you for listening. Wishing you a peaceful night.